All right. I'd like to make an important, but possibly fairly brief video. And a lot of people I hear have questions about engaging your glutes when you run. All right. So if you don't have that question, at some point it might be a good question to ask because your glutes are very important. They're the thickest muscle in your body in terms of cross-section. One of the strongest muscles in your body, right in the center of your body. And so they provide the power for a lot of things. And stability, and even safety, and they're sort of an anti-fatigue muscle because they're so big and strong. And so the use of your glutes is extremely important in doing almost anything. But especially we're going to talk about running. So how do you engage your glutes when you're running? Good question, right? So let's start out just by squeezing the glutes. So I squeeze my glutes. Even though you're looking at me straight on, you may be able to see that when I squeeze my glutes, my knees come to the outside, my thighs externally rotate, weight goes on to the outsides of my feet, and what definitely happens is your pelvis comes forward. So if you squeeze your glutes very hard, your pelvis comes forward farther than it needs to stand properly. But the glutes are involved not only in climbing stairs, getting out of a chair, running, but they're also involved just in standing. So if we didn't have these big, powerful glutes, you notice that a lot of the apes don't have that. They have more of a flat butt, and they don't quite stand upright, you see. These are very important even in standing upright. And like me, you're getting older, they still are very, very important, as they always have been. And so, how do you engage your glutes when running? Some people talk about a phrase I don't necessarily like is my glutes aren't firing. But there's nothing usually wrong with the glutes unless you have a neurological problem or severe injury. The glutes will fire if you know how to use them. So that's what we're talking about here. So squeezing the glutes, a couple of times you'll feel where they are. And then let's try something else. Let's try something that doesn't use the glutes the way they might be used. So first, let's see again. I showed in standing, if I were to walk like this, or if I were to engage my glutes, they would help me be upright. So let's try something else. First, we're going to get down on the knees, and now I'm going to have you watch while I squeeze my glutes. So again, the pelvis comes forward. Maybe you can see that. Pelvis comes forward. Forward, forward, forward. So we squeeze the glutes in the standing position and in kneeling. Again, they have the same action. They bring the pelvis forward, help you be upright, and so on. So what happens if I were going to walk or run? I would, at some point, this is an exaggeration, but I would have one leg out in front of the other. So this is my right leg. Could you try to squeeze that right glute? And then could you try to squeeze the left glute? And again, now you're going to see the pelvis comes forward, and I can squeeze that very powerfully. Because of the position of my leg, I can't use the glute as powerfully on this side. You can try it on the other side. So in walking or running, one leg comes in front of the other at some point. And I squeeze my right glute powerfully. My pelvis comes forward and turns to the left a little bit. Now try to squeeze the left glute, and you'll find you can't quite do what you want to do there. It won't squeeze as powerfully as the other one. You can't quite finish that contraction. So the most powerful position of the glutes can be in this position in kneeling, or of course in standing. So if I were to lift a weight, and I were to come up like this, my glutes will really, they will help me throughout the lift, but they will really help me finish that lift if it were a deadlift. So my glutes finish that lift for me. Come into that powerful standing position. So let's try something that moves forward from what we've been talking about. So the glutes are most powerful here, and if I have to take a step forward, like that, then one leg comes forward. Okay, so if I were to step up on this step, and I were to maintain this position, I would pull myself up with my quads. And if you pay attention to that, you can try this on a step. And if you get to going like this, you will really feel some work in the quads. And if I bring my weight back farther, I feel more weight in the quads. Very little in the glutes. Okay, so here's another way that I could use my, that I could not use my glutes. So I could step up like this, I could round my back, and again, bring my weight back, and I'm using mainly my quads. So in running, we don't want to run like this. We don't want to round the back and run. Unless you're ducking under a tree branch or something like that. And that's maybe not the best way to do that either. But we want to maintain some length in that spine. Okay, so we don't want to do that. Now, if I wanted to use my glutes, I had a friend I was hiking with once. We were going up hills. He said, "Boy, your quads must really be tired after going up these hills." I said, "No, I don't use my quads that much going uphill." And so if I were now to, instead of staying up like this, or completely upright, so here's completely upright, quads are tired. But if I were to maintain some length in the spine, there's a place here where I can begin to use my glutes. And you'll really feel it. And you experiment with subtle differences here. And you'll begin to feel your glutes engaging. Very little quads. So you can do the same thing in running. I'm going to show one more thing here. We can catch it on the video. So if I were to maintain some length in my spine, lean forward from the ankles, at some point, I would begin to feel my posterior chain engaging to keep me upright. Now, you don't have to engage your glutes more than you need to, but your glutes will come into play somewhere in there. So you'll feel they are being involved. So if you will carry some practice and experimentation into your running, you can find an orientation that naturally engages your glutes without you having to try to do anything. So when you're running, experiment. Experiment many times with subtlety, mainly with observation. Do not contract your glutes when you're running. Do not consciously contract your glutes when you're running. But experiment with your orientation so that your hips get involved, your glutes get involved naturally. Look for, observe, and find the place where your glutes are naturally engaged and where your posterior chain is naturally engaged without you having to try to consciously do that. So, another thing is you don't want to use your glutes to push like that. Your glutes, again, are mainly engaged to hold you stable and upright in your mid stance, so that when you take a step in running, I can't do it because I'm not running, but your foot comes down under your hip, and again, you see, the shock is absorbed through the posterior chain here, through your entire self. But the glutes play a huge part in that. Up, down under the hip, glutes absorb that, and you come off of that. But then you don't try to push backwards. So again, you don't try to consciously contract the glutes. You don't try to consciously push backwards with them. You'll feel a little bit of that occurring naturally. We don't want it to incur any more than it needs to. Use the least effort possible to do anything you do. But we see how the glutes engage. We see how subtle differences can make a difference. And we have something to experiment with. Your alignment can engage at mid-stance your glutes. And again, that happens, and you can experiment with it again just by observing, not by consciously pushing yourself around. So go out and play with those ideas. This is very important, not only because it will improve your endurance, but it will also keep you safer if your glutes are properly engaged, if your entire self is properly engaged, if your entire spring system of your body is properly engaged, you are, as long as you do other things too, you are much less likely, say, to injure your hips. So, hope you found that interesting. I hope you see a little bit about how we can play with how to engage the glutes. Of course, you can do glute strengthening exercises, but that would be auxiliary. If you simply do glute strengthening exercises, you might get very good at doing the glute strengthening exercises themselves, but not know how to apply it. So that's what we're talking about today. How do we apply this? How do we engage the glutes? How do we experiment? How do we notice subtle changes? And how do we simply notice what the body wants to do naturally? And how do we become more aware of the fact that small changes make a huge difference? So I hope this was fun, enjoyable. I hope it was helpful.